And when they said yes, and they said 50-50, but in hindsight, I wouldn't have got 50 at that time. I didn't really know what I was doing. But that gave me the confidence to know that I was on the right track. It's like, if these guys who develop thousands of units to date, fully integrated firm are willing to partner with me, who at that time was probably 25, why wouldn't I continue to try to, swing this bat and try to get a home run?
This is the real estate investing experience. We get it. Real estate can be rough sometimes, and that's why we bring in the experts to talk about the experiences you won't hear anywhere else. With your hosts, John Cohen and Chris Grinzik.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Investing Experience. I'm your host, Chris Grenzig. With me, as always, is John Cohen. How we doing?
We're good. We're battling, right? We're sort of just hanging in there, seeing what happens. We have nothing to buy. I could say the first time in my life, I looked at the future and, the deal's got to start coming soon. But who knows when? So we're hanging in there.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. It felt like, a couple months back, we were still trying to manage the whole COVID situation. Now it just feels like another day in the life. It doesn't feel like I don't want to say freaking out, but it just kind of feels normal now. Surprisingly, so far, haven't felt too much of an impact with the CARES Act running out, and without a new one coming in sight. Haven't had any calls from managers freaking out about huge delinquency, unless I missed the memo.
We haven't seen it. Not yet. Those are the immortal words. We have our management calls tomorrow, so I'm sure tomorrow they'll be throwing things and going crazy. But we haven't seen listen, there's 20-something million people out of work, and we haven't had major problems yet. So that's positive. We never know what's going to happen in the future, but you're right. I have not got the knock on the door to, oh shit, we're 50% collected. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. It's August 25th. We're coming into the last week of the month. We'll see how collections kind of shake out going into it, because, we've been picking up people very late in the month and even trickling into the next month. So we'll see how this next 7-10 days kind of shakes out. But kind of surprising. I thought it was going to be way worse. I thought we were going to see a lot more blood in the water earlier on. But maybe people have now spent their savings. So maybe it's next month that we'll feel an impact. So we'll see how next month goes. But we've got a great guest on today. I'm curious to hear not only his story, his experiences, his insights, but I'm curious to see, how things have been going for him as well, too. Because if you're watching, you'll see he's been shaking his head a little bit. If you're listening, you obviously haven't seen it. So I am very happy to have him on. So with that being said, Brandon, thanks for joining us, bud.
Thank you. I appreciate it, man. Really appreciate the invite. I've been watching your stuff for a while, so mutual respect there for sure. Looking forward to it.
So let's kick it off. Let's hear a little bit about you. So a couple minutes, just your background, your journey, what you've done and what you're doing.
Yeah, no, great question. So I'm Brandon Rule. I go on social media. I'm known as B_Rule. So B Rule. Got the name back in playing sports in high school. It was too many Brandons born in the 80s, so it was a million of us. So Brandon Rule, people call me B Rule. I am a commercial real estate developer that primarily focuses on affordable housing development. Started off in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and currently am residing and looking to do work in Washington, D.C. as well. So I expanded my company out here. From inception, I've always wanted to help people. I didn't know real estate was going to be my journey. I thought I was going to be a doctor for a very, very, very long time. When I grew up and went to college, I took chemistry and bio and quickly realized that path wasn't for me. Those grades were not strong enough to put me in a position to do surgery or physical therapy or any of that. So quickly shifted my path, and I think I ended up in the right place doing what I really feel like I was called to do. So growing up in Milwaukee, inner city community, that's really like the baseline. I was born in Los Angeles. So I'll start from the beginning. I was born in Los Angeles to two high school sweethearts from Chicago who moved to LA. We then lived in Los Angeles for a bit. When I was in kindergarten, I went through a horrific earthquake. It was one of the worst natural disasters in financial history, and it ruined everything. And I was homeless for a bit. So
Mm-hmm.
shortly thereafter, my parents relocated to Milwaukee. My dad wanted to go to Chicago, but my mother wanted to go to Milwaukee, and my grandfather had a little bit more space there, so we moved in with him. Ended up starting to go to school there, finished elementary, went on to middle, high, and of course college as well, and just stayed in Milwaukee throughout. So again, growing up, I always thought and knew I was going to be a doctor because I wanted to help people. That was the foundation of why I wanted to do what I wanted to do. My dad was an X-ray technician. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, but she did a lot of community development work, and is the president of our neighborhood association for the last 20 years. So that's like the foundation and the pillars of where my community approach and outlook comes from, both of my parents. And my grandparents actually, I think, and my parents now too, they have a business as well. But my grandparents, looking at what they were doing, both of them inspired me to take a deeper look at this entrepreneurial journey. One of my grandfathers was a taxi cab driver in Chicago. Other one was a street pharmacist, pretty big street pharmacist. And by the time that I was born, he lost all of his money. So really was inspired to do it I guess, for lack of a better term, the right way, the legal way, because I wanted to create generational wealth and pass that down to, my grandchildren and their grandchildren and their grandchildren. And honestly, seeing that being stripped from my grandfather in that way and not being able to benefit from the things in which he had created is really the backbone of my inspiration, on top of the fact that seeing his influence, right? Like a lot of my aunts, uncles, cousins, etc., also went into that life of street pharmacy because of the influence that my grandfather had on them. So if I can do the same for my community and do it in a different way, I think, making a ton of money, having an autonomy, like some of the core principles of entrepreneurship that, has to be paired with grit and, creativeness and all of these other things. If I can influence the next generation of people in my family and the inner city communities, then we can, start to change the trajectory of, we know the statistics when it comes to the wealth gap and some of those other things. But if I can provide that exposure and people can be influenced by the work that I'm doing, then we're ultimately making the world a better place. So that's like the origin of like where I'm from and who I am and how I started to get into what I currently do. I was at college at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and came across a program called the ACRE program. It's Associates in Commercial Real Estate. And this program really exposed me to commercial real estate development because I had no clue what it was. Even growing up, I thought that I would have, call it a few rental properties on the side, maybe a duplex or two, and, have just enough to make some residual income off of. But when I got exposed to commercial real estate and development in particular, I was like, oh, okay, let me explore what this is. And I use that as a baseline to catapult my career by really connecting with all of the people that we met, all of our speakers, all of the people that were part of this network, and started to just pick their brains and unpack what it meant to become a developer. So that really was how I started to go into it. And at the age of 23, I left my job as a personal banker after school and went full-time in real estate development. And about 8 years later, I'm finally here and being recognized as an actual developer as opposed to an aspiring developer, I guess you can say. So it's been a journey, but I loved it every step of the way. It didn't come without hardship and heartache, but what does. So, yeah.
Awesome. I think that's an interesting story, and I definitely want to dive into it deeper. One thing I'm personally very curious about is you spoke about your grandfather and learning from him and kind of what happened to him. When did you really start becoming interested in that story? And then when did it actually have an effect on you? Because for myself, my dad had a business. Well, really, my dad was running it, but my mom also helped and was a part of it. So it was really their business. And he worked it when I was a kid and eventually sold it when I was like 7 or 8 because it was just becoming too much. And I really like talking to him in the last couple years. And, I get more and more interested as time goes on to hear about how he did things, mistakes he made, how he was successful. And as I've gotten older, I've always known about it, but I've become more interested recently. How for you did that story impact you? And like, when did you start to become interested in it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think to kind of your point, it impacted me at different levels at different times, right? So when I was younger, I knew about it, but my parents didn't really want to talk about it too much. My family didn't really want to go into detail about it because obviously it ended up in not the best situation.
Mm-hmm.
He got hit with the RICO law. They seized all his assets, and all of these other things started to happen. But when I would hear these conversations with him being with, various celebrities and funding careers for some of the biggest, even comics that we even know and artists that we know today, it's like, whoa, I didn't know he was doing all of this. So at a younger age, it was just one of those, like, I guess fairy tale type of things, like, oh yeah, he had all of this going on, but that wasn't the person that I knew. The person that I knew was living, very humble life and, a pretty nice house. And he talked more. So he was in the Vietnam War as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew more about that story when I was younger than I did his entrepreneurial endeavors.
Sure.
So that's kind of like the perception in which I've known of him. But as I started to get older and learn more about that story, I'd say in high school is when I started to really, explore and think through, like, hey, what is this? Unfortunately, shortly thereafter, he passed when I was around college years. So I wasn't able to have that engagement with him as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have to have it with, my parents and my aunts and my uncles, and just extracting the third party stories in which they know, which is still making an impact on my life, because it's like, oh, that's why, this person is doing this, or that's why this person is doing that. And again, just understanding the impact of really his influence on my family. That's what I'd say from mid-20s to now has really shifted my perception when it came to exposure. Because I don't like attention very much. I've always been a pretty sociable guy. Like, I'm kind of introverted and extroverted at the same time, because my mother is one and my dad is the other. But I didn't like attention. But then when I started to understand his story and how it impacted my family, and how really just, people that you look up to and admire can truly change your trajectory, I knew that I had a duty to now fulfill for my community, and it's an obligation that I'm willing to step to the challenge for. So I'd say different levels. When I was younger, I knew about him being in the military. When I got a little older, I knew that he was an entrepreneur in that way. But then I'd say like mid-20s, I really, really got into the story and used that as a propeller for all the things in which I'm doing.
Awesome. I love that. So I think another thing I want to touch on, and I'm very curious to hear, is you said, you basically quit at 23 and jumped full-time into this. And sounds like it took many years to get to any stage of, we'll call it quote unquote success. Yourself described aspiring to established developer. Can you talk a little bit about being 22, 23, 24, and that decision of actually jumping ship, going full boat into it at not only a young age, but I'm sure little to no experience, and what that was like for you, why you ultimately decided, hey, I've got to, do this now or do this full time, and what happened in your early years?
Yeah, great question. So when I finished school, I started working as a personal banker at PNC Bank, and I was making about $23,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that for the rest of my life, this wasn't going to be sustainable. When I was in high school, I had a thought in my mind that by the time I'm 30, I want to be an entrepreneur and work for myself, and I want to be a millionaire. Didn't know how it was going to happen. Again, I thought I was going to be a doctor at the time, but that was my goal. So when I was making $23,000 at 21 years old, fresh out of high school, I would wake up at 6 a.m, go put on these nice fancy suits, sit in a branch office all day. And about 6 p.m. we would close, get home at 7. So now I wasted, on average, 12 hours of my day in exchange for $23,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
So I quickly then realized that wasn't going to be the rest of my life. So I started to put myself in a position of power, I guess. And really autonomy has always been important to me. Like, what am I doing with my time? I want to decide that. I don't want anyone to decide that for me. Even more so than money. Autonomy in my time is more important. So at 21, I got my hands on a pro forma because I started to network with all of these people. And then I never really had one. I didn't have a formal real estate training or experience. And I just started to play in it. Like, oh, how do you do this? You know?
Mm-hmm.
And I started working on development projects, more specifically tax credit deals, which are much more complex and nuanced than traditional just ground up development. So start working in this, and every single day I would spend 4 or 5 hours after work just pounding the pavement in this Excel spreadsheet. You know, the pro forma is essentially a business plan for real estate, right? So it's like, oh, this is how you do. So I would look up, what's a term? What's an amortization? Like, what does this mean? How does LTV, why is my, debt service affected by my operating expenses? And why does the, vacancy affect, the NOI and all of these things that I just had no clue. So I would study that from 21 to about 23. Around the time where I was 23, I came across a 4-unit property that I wanted to invest in. It was in Milwaukee. It was only $85,000. I said, okay, if I get it as an FHA loan, house hacking type of situation, FHA loan, put, $5,000-$6,000 down, I can have an asset that on a monthly basis I only pay $1,000, but I'm cash flowing $1,500. At the time, my bank was only paying me about $750 every 2 weeks. So that was the same thing. So It's like, okay, if I purchase this, then I can now be free and live off the same amount of money that I was living off of. So I ended up acquiring that, I wouldn't say May of 2013. I think I left April of 2013. I think I had a bonus or something coming in from the first quarter in May. So I waited to the end where my bonus was going to hit. And then once my bonus hit, I put in my 2 weeks and I was out. So I just kind of like figured it out. I wanted to be able to go to these meetings and meet with these people and have these conversations. Pre-COVID, we weren't doing this on Zoom. We were doing it in person. So I was rolling around, trying to meet with all these people. But again, 12 hours of my day was going towards this banking job. Luckily, I had really, really, really good managers that allowed for me to have a little bit more flexibility than I probably should have. Go to a meeting and get back 2 hours later because it was 30 minutes away, back and forth, and then it was an hour-long meeting. So, once I purchased that 4-unit and got my bonus, I was just off to the races, and I was able to double down and spend really 100% of my time, if I wanted to, on commercial real estate development. But the 4-unit needed work, so it was a value-add property for sure. Put about $10,000 into it with a tremendous amount of sweat equity for the next few months. I would never do it again in that way, but it was a good experience for a 23-year-old to, get my hands dirty and really be in there. So,
I think that's why. I think that's crucial. Sweat equity isn't for everybody, but I think it's a huge part of getting started, because I'm sure you learned a ton of things early on in the process, probably made some mistakes, did some things you wouldn't do today, but, helped jumpstart you and also, gave you something to work on in the meantime. And like you said, I think that's a big thing of, luckily or unluckily, because you were making so little, it was very easy to offset your income and kind of leave early on. And it's so interesting because I think, so many people talk about, offsetting their income and doing things like that. And I think people would be shocked at how little they can really live on pending family and kids. And, if you have family to take care of that isn't directly related to you, I understand that sometimes not everybody has the same opportunity that, a 23-year-old Brandon did, or, a 23-year-old Chris did, to be able to, live on, something very cheap, or to house hack and do it. But for somebody that is younger, has some flexibility, it is very possible to live on a much smaller amount than people think, and to spend that time and have that opportunity to now not have to worry about 8, 10, 12 hours of working on a job you don't like or isn't paying you, a lot of dollars per hour. You can now devote to something else is actually, very liberating. So it's really interesting to hear you take that path.
I agree 100%.
So how did you then go from a 4-unit house hack to, some of the awesome developments you guys are working on now? What was that path like?
Yeah, so from 2013, renovated that. I then started to understand. I started, in 2010, 2011 on what does this process look like in terms of development. So I'd say by 2015, I had started to understand what the process entailed. At the beginning of 2015, middle of 2015, there was a city RFP that went out for a property that's really across the street from my first development, not very far from where I was initially raised. So I ended up putting together a proposal for it, pitching it to another developer and saying, hey, can we go in on this together? And when they said yes, and they said 50-50, but in hindsight, I wouldn't have got 50 at that time. I didn't really know what I was doing. But that gave me the confidence to know that I was on the right track. It's like, if these guys who developed thousands of units to date, fully integrated firm are willing to partner with me, who at that time was probably 25, why wouldn't I continue to try to, swing this bat and try to get a home run, right? So I ended up submitting for that. We didn't get it awarded, obviously, but I knew I could do it. So I was just looking and looking and looking. And instead of going through the public process, I found some private land, ended up getting it under contract, found people to believe in my mission and help me pay the earnest money. Mm-hmm. And once I had that under contract, and once I fully knew exactly how the numbers worked and that this was a viable deal, I was able to then negotiate with, much larger developers to come onto it because they saw the value in it. It's like, mm-hmm. Okay, well, if our developer fee is going to be, let's say, $1.2 million and we can split it in half. I mean, $600,000 isn't something that people just turn away from regularly unless they have, conflicting things, other priorities, limited bandwidth, et cetera, et cetera. But if it's a group that is looking to get into an area that they're not currently in or expand a portfolio because they don't have any pipeline at the moment, it's pretty much a no-brainer. So I was able to select a partner, and we ended up submitting for low-income housing tax credits in Wisconsin, and I got them awarded to my company in 2016. Mm-hmm. So once that happened, I knew I was off to the races. But during this time, I will say, I actually ran out of money and I had some medical things going on with, family and friends. So I needed to get a job. In 2014, I ended up taking a really hybrid position. I was the only one in the country at the time doing this, where I worked half-time for 2 CDFIs, so community development financial institutions. And both of them allow for me to work remotely from home. One was based out of Madison, Wisconsin, and the other one out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. So that then provided some additional context that gave me more ammo and equipment for the things that I'm doing today. I'll touch on that in a moment. But I just wanted to highlight that I was actually working a job, but I was working from home. So I had some, again, autonomy to work 40 hours there and still work 40 hours here without there being very much friction. So, that was the process, essentially.
I love that. I think, it shows where there's a will, there's a way. Being able to go out and find people that are willing to work for you, but also recognizing that, hey, I have to bring something to the table that's, valuable to the person I'm looking to work with. You recognize your shortcomings at the time, but we're able to find something and somebody to fill those shortcomings, but bring something to the table for them. Like you said, you found the partner that was trying to get into an area or had a slow pipeline. I'm sure there's plenty of developers in that area that were already doing deals that you recognize were probably not good partners, or you did try to pitch them. Absolutely. And they said, hey, this isn't a good fit for us. So, I'm sure it wasn't a, one phone call and you found the right person right away. I'm sure it was, tons of networking over time to kind of find those resources. And I think it's,
and the relationships that I built for the last 5 years put me in a position to be able to make those phone calls and have that relationship. I mean, you both know real estate is heavily a relationship business at the end of the day. It's who do you know, who do you feel comfortable with, who can actually execute. Once you get those questions answered, you then can now do things that you couldn't do before, even if you have the skill set. But the proven track record is so important, and comfort in relationships. So that's really what helped me put myself in a position for when the time I was ready, I was able to strike.
So let me ask a question I think would be valuable for a lot of people listening. How were you able to network with people to get up to a stage where you're talking with, established developers, people that are willing to take down deals, have the capability of doing deals that are in the millions of dollars? I mean, if it supports a $1.2 million fee, I mean, it's probably, in the tens of millions of dollars range for the property. How were you able to get in touch with people like that? And then how were you able to maintain a relationship over, several years or a couple years to the point where something came through, you felt comfortable picking up the phone and saying, hey, I've got something that I think would interest you?
Great question. I would say the first place that I started was just going to a ton of conferences. I knew I wanted to be in the affordable housing space. I knew I wanted to be in the development space. And I knew I wanted to be in kind of community development finance space. So I would go year after year to at least 5 to 7 conferences. And then eventually you start to see these people over and over and over again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you're at the conference, the people at the conference are industry leaders or subject matter experts in whatever they do. Like, that is why they are there. So when I am there and, I'm giving out my business cards and talking and things like that, the position in which I put myself in is developer, right? But I also come with extreme humility to the point where it's like, I know I'm not, insert developer here. This is him 30 years ago, right? Like, this is me trying to get there. So then you'll find people that are willing to like have a conversation with you because it's something that they don't typically see. You don't see people willing to go outside their comfort zone and build these relationships and be in these rooms and be intentional about how they are, taking the proper steps to do this work. Because there's no traditional path. Like, you can't go to school, graduate, and become a developer. It just doesn't happen. There's no recipe. It's not being a chef or a dentist or a doctor, any of that. So you had to be creative in your entry point. And for me, it was just building and leveraging relationships. So when I would go to the affordable housing conferences, I would see other developers, I would see syndicators, I would see construction companies and property management companies, and, the list goes on, attorneys, et cetera. So it's like, oh, this is what a real estate team consists of. Okay, well, let me pick your brain. While we're here, you're already here. Let's talk for a good 5 to 10 minutes. Let me show you that I at least know enough for us to start this conversation. And let me ask for your time at a later point, because at the end of the day, it's always an exchange of value. Sometimes people's value is simply wanting to help the next generation of people, So it's like, how can I put myself in a position to where someone who's extremely busy is willing to allocate their time towards me? The only way you can do that is to do your homework and to get recommendations from other people that have already started to get to know who you were, get to understand what makes you tick. And I think the mission behind what I was doing helped a lot as well, because it was genuine, it was pure, it was authentic. Like, this guy is, no matter what, gonna do this. So if I can help in some way, shape, or form, I'm gonna take that step. They say that success has many parents, but failure is an orphan, right? It's like, as you're growing, you can build that steam up and you can build a ton of relationships. But the moment you fail, it's that much harder to do it. So just make sure you put yourself in a position to be successful in every minor step of the way, so people can continue to go down that path with you.
I think the other thing that you mentioned, it's not a sprint, right? It's a marathon. So you can't, I see it all the time today, a 22-year-old kid, not unsimilar to yourself or Chris or myself, you want to get involved and you want to make $1 million day one, when you realize that, real estate is a marathon. It might even be an Ironman, right? It's not a 100-meter sprint that you start today and bang, you have $1 million on your first development fee or whatever it is. There's going to be ups and downs, but like you said, you got to put yourself in the position to succeed by networking, by going to events, by talking to everybody. And then you basically, without, calling a spade, you're giving everybody a value. Okay, I find this person to be extremely valuable. I'm going to put them higher up in my contacts. And this person probably is a waste of my time. But you still have to go through the waste of times to pick the brains to find out who's going to be the value of you to you in the future. So most people don't want to hear that story. Most people want to hear, every single Instagram ad and Facebook ad. It's all bought a house, flipped. I saw a post the other day, like flip 5 houses in 5 days. And I'm like, that's just fucking bullshit. It's yes, you might be able to do that, but realistically, you got to realize that you are lacing up your shoes for a marathon, and you're starting today. When you first start to, you start your marathon, you're not running full speed out of the box. You're never going to make it. So if you take your time, put yourself in the right position, don't bring shitty deals, understand what you're getting yourself on. And you illustrated that perfectly. And I don't think people talk about it enough, because everybody wants the shiny object, quick flip, fast money. It just doesn't work that way. There is time and effort that goes into everything that's done.
I agree 100%, man. The propaganda on the internet today is ridiculous. I mean, real estate is one of the most sexy industries, right? Real estate and tech, I would say those are the two most sexy industries in the world right now. So you get these like people who study, Robert Kiyosaki and do a modern day version of Rich Dad Poor Dad, where, you may have some real estate experience, but the primary meat and core of your money came from sales of this product, which is just teaching, right? Like, you are a New York Times bestseller. You're not necessarily a real estate investor, right? Like there's a difference. And I think what's going on in the media now is that people are becoming social media experts and marketers, and they're not actually real estate investors or developers. And what happens is marketers can also be chameleons. They're oftentimes chameleons, right? Like, you all do really good at the marketing work and what you do, so you understand it. But the reason why I gravitated towards everything that you all are doing is because there's substance behind it. Like, when I watch a video, I know that I'm going to get something that's meaningful. Mm-hmm. As opposed to those 5 flips in 5 days, I wouldn't even turn it on because there's no value there. Like, you're using propaganda to just extract attention to hopefully put them in a funnel and sell them a course. That's not what real estate is about. Real estate is the long game. It's a marathon. It's, like you said, Ironman competition. And you have to understand that there's no get rich quick. And even if it is, 2008 happens, right? So get rich quick and then you go down quick, right? Like, it's going to happen. Real estate is extremely cyclical. And if you don't fully understand the real estate process at every single stage in which it is, and really what you are doing in your relationship with that stage, you're going to be in trouble. So I agree.
It's funny you bring that up, because the other day I was talking to a friend of mine who he's in his 70s and he's been through a lot. And he said, his kid brings him, and he's got a younger kid in his 30s who his dad's been very successful. So he has not had to really work. And the kid wants to get involved, and he keeps bringing him like drop shipping things and real estate courses. And the dad's like, I was talking to him about it because he asked me what my opinion on something was. I said, listen, there's nothing wrong with those things, right? It's what you get out of it that's going to help set the foundation for whatever you want to do. But he said, how do you take advice from a 22-year-old kid on the internet that's flipping houses? The kid probably doesn't even own a house. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with, a 22-year-old coach. I'm saying that, take advice from someone that's done it, not someone that's really good at putting together the marketing. Because you're right, marketers are chameleons, and you can sell anything with good advertising, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they know what they're doing. They're just good at selling it. They're a teacher, and that's fine. But I always tell people, buy 10 courses or put 50 grand into a house and mess it up. You're going to get more out of the mistake than you're going to get out of the guy that gives you a 12-week program online. Not saying it's bad, but everything out there now is just shiny object in front of people's face for $9.99 or $6.59. Then you buy that, then you spend another $250, and then you get a special ebook for $350. And next thing you know, you're $5,000 into it, and nothing's happened. If you put out good content and you are, engaging and people can learn from it, that's going to benefit, 5 ways over. And that's,
absolutely.
One thing I believe, coaches, mentors, programs, they're good. I'm not talking badly about them, but understand that, you got to do it. You got to get advice from someone that's done it, and you got to take their advice and use it. Because if I tell you something to do and you don't do it, shame on me for maybe telling you the wrong thing, or more often than not, shame on the person for not implementing it, doing it. So you're 100% right. And that's the scary thing out there right now, is just there's so many people that can sell a program that may or may
Yes.
not yield anything.
I agree. So before you go, Chris, like for me, I take a lot of pride in the work that I've done, right? So it's like I've done a 60 unit new development. I've done an 89 unit. I have a 79 unit. I have a 150 unit. I have retail. I have mixed use. I have $200 million pipeline currently. Like, that's all me. And I don't have any staff. It's literally just me. And I'm the lead developer on most of all of that. So, and co-own some, but I'm actively doing it, which is why, as much as I study the marketing and know how it goes and plan to put more content out, I just don't really have that much time right now until I build the capacity internally to be able to outsource some of those roles and then streamline the rest of this stuff on this side. So same with you all. Like, how many doors do you have right now? Thousands, 3,000 or so?
Just under 3,000.
Yeah, like 2,700.
To me, that means something. Like, I don't need to hear about a course that you're selling. I can actually see the work that you're doing, right? Like, if that is increased by 500 doors over the last 6 months, even if it decreases when you sell it, it's like there's activity there, and I know there's experience there. So when you're talking about the asset management perspective, when you're talking about the cost basis of, how you're looking at some of these deals up front to be able to invest in it, like, you are a company that I would want to put my money with, right? As opposed to some of the other companies that are just flashy objects. So I agree 100%.
And we only paid him a little bit to say that, so we appreciate it. No, but I know we talk about it all the time. Listen, everybody wants to monetize everything nowadays, but at the same point, I could not agree with you more. I had a conversation with a friend of mine. I said, "Are you moving towards the coaching platform?" And he said, I said, listen, I have 3,000 units, give or take, and I got, 200 investors, and I have, employees. How am I going to, charge someone $50,000 for them to pick my brain once a month? It's not fair to anyone else, my investors, myself, my team, my partners. It's not fair to them unless I can hire someone to step into that role and I can take it on a different role. But that's not the intention. So I agree. And, if someone's just doing too much of one thing, you got to realize that you only have so much time in the day. So I couldn't agree 100%. I could not possibly flaw what you said. It's just, understand all that. You're right. If you're buying or selling or whatever it is, but you don't need 500 people that work for you. At the same time, you can be really successful, but you got to use your time properly. And sometimes a lot of things out there just are not doing that.
Yep.
Yeah. I think when you hear a lot about like very successful or legendary like consultants or coaches, especially in the business world, hear them a lot with like tech companies for, people that helped Apple get started up and Google and Microsoft or whatever. They were always guys that built a business, then were successful. And instead of building another business, they just decided to help other people and get paid for it. And I think too many people are just too quick to go into the coaching role early. And I think that's where some of the disconnect becomes, where it's like, like, are you just an operator or a marketer? And
Yep.
I think that's a lot of what both of you were just saying. It's like, being a coach can be great because you can transact and market yourself and make some decent money doing it. But if you're really trying to build a business and be an operator as well, it's very tough to have the time available to charge someone some of these crazy lump sum amounts to really dedicate the time to give them good value for money. So I think people just have to be very understanding of who they're getting involved with when they look at it. And again, there's nothing wrong with either route. Just, make sure value for money and what you're looking at and who you're getting is apparent. But one thing, Brandon, that you touched on that I really liked that I think people may have just skipped over was when you were 23. And if I'm 28, so I think back to 23, the presence of mind to say, okay, by the time I'm 30, I think was incredible. Because me, when I was 23, I knew thinking about 30, I was like, that's old as fuck. Who the hell wants to be 30?
Right.
And now being 28, almost 29, I'm like 30. Wow, I'm still going to be so
right
young. I got so much time. But I think that presence of mind, back to like marathon versus sprint, to say, okay, I'm going to start at 23 for 30, like 7 years. That's a long time. I mean, that's longer than, significantly longer than any of your professional career would probably be by a good margin. To think about that. And then I think what's also very important that people would, again, probably have skipped over is a few years in, you hit a huge stumbling block if you ran out of money. But instead of just giving up, you got a job and just extended it probably by a little bit further because you had hours you had to
2
sacrifice,
years.
but to get some
Yep.
money, like just the humility to go out and get a job to continue to work towards it, I think is a lot of people would have looked at it and said, okay, I've done this for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. I don't know the exact timeline, and said, I tried, it didn't work. It's time to get a job and, get that corporate life. Whereas somebody
Yep.
who's determined and has that longer term vision of, 2014, okay, I'm not even halfway there yet. Like this is just, this is a 6, 12, 18 month stumbling block. This is just something I've got to do to get up some extra capital to continue to go. And I'm going to find a job that allows me to continue to do what I want to do as much as possible within reason without stepping over bounds. So credit to you. And I hope people really go back and listen to that and understand exactly what it is, because that's the difference between, being an entrepreneur, wanting to build a business and do something, to somebody who, wants to give it a go and is just going to dip their toe in the water.
Yep. I agree.
Well,
Thank you for highlighting that.
Yeah. Because I'm curious, what was that like for you? Like at the time, were you like, shit, like this is it, this is the end of the road? Or was it more like, hey, like this is just what I've got to do to make this work. And, it's just, I got to get some extra capital and here's how I'm going to do it.
Yeah, it wasn't the end. I never thought it was the end. I mean, I've faced doomsday many, many times and never really acknowledged it. Like failure for me is just another step in the process, right? Like it's not, failure is only failure when it's over, right? Like either you win or you learn. There's no true losses. So for me, I didn't look at it like, oh, it's done. It was more so, okay, well, let me figure this new credit out. So I was running out of money. I ended up starting this like adult family home in one of my units. So I wasn't getting some of that income. So that was 1/4 of the rent that I was going to be living off of was now out of my pocket. So because of that, I was trying to get that started. It just left me in a position where I needed to get a job. So started having conversations with these groups, and took about 8 months for me to even get that job, honestly. But when it came, it was really beneficial to me because it allowed, and I was very intentional about what job I would take. I wasn't going to take anything. This was a commercial lending job where I was doing small business lending to people of color, to minority, women, and veteran-owned companies in the state of Wisconsin. So for me, it's like, okay, this is aligned with my mission. And I was working from home. And it was the most money I'd ever made. I think at that time it was, in the mid, anywhere from 45 to 60, like 50 to 60,000 or so, which to me in Milwaukee, that's upper middle class, frankly. So I'm like, okay, well, I can do this. And I was learning at that job. So I never really worked for a development company. I've never worked for a financial institution in that way. So this was good because I was sitting in on lending committees. I was putting together the package, to review and pitch it to lending committees. I was getting all the models and reviewing them and putting it into our models and starting to really understand the psyche of the people on the other side of credit. So now I, intimately involved with 5 C's of credit, know what they're looking for. So all of my deals moving forward now, I've already been a lender before. I know what it looks like to underwrite a deal from their perspective and what risks they're looking for on both the business side as well as the real estate side. So that was the key for both of those companies. One was a little bit more focused on kind of real estate and nonprofit type of lending, and the other one was just straight SBA small business lending. And it really, really gave me exposure because we had biweekly meetings. I had a lending committee meeting every week, depending on which company I was, working for. So the 10 plus people that were all on the lending committee on both sides. So now take 15 to 20 people. I'm able to hear their thoughts about how they're analyzing these deals over the course of the 2-year period, in addition to my own internal homework while I'm trying to figure out how to do the development thing. So it was a very strategic move on my behalf to take that role in particular. So yes, I was strapped for cash, and yes, I needed the money. But if there was another role for me to take, I wouldn't have done it. It had to be aligned with what my goals were going to be. That was the only reason why I did it.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I'm talking to a friend of mine who's thinking about jumping full time into it, and I'm actually going to tell him to listen to this episode. And one of the things we always spoke about was like, what happens if you start and like you don't have money or it doesn't work out? And I just always said, like, you can just go get another job. And I said, to be perfectly honest, there's probably a ton of people that would hire you part-time or full-time in the, in what you're looking to do in syndication or in asset management or something similar that would either, allow you to get some experience you don't have or allow you to kind of float yourself for, some time. And they would probably help you out with your own stuff, especially if you're upfront with them. If you said like, hey, like I'm looking to build this on my side, but truth be told, I've hit some snags and I just need some cash and I could use some experience and I want to help you guys. And in the meantime, and then eventually I'm going to go off on my own. There's a seat for that ass. Like people will hire that person. We would love to have people that understand the business and have that, entrepreneurial mindset or that vision of like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And especially if you're upfront and say like, hey, once I'm able to stand on my own 2 feet, I'm going to go off on my own. That's fine because you're setting expectations up front. If somebody's like, hey, no, I need somebody that's going to be here for 5-10 years. Okay, it's just not the right seat. But I'm telling you now, there's plenty of people that could use extra help from somebody that's willing to learn and give good value and, really try to gain that experience. There's a ton of people that would do that. So I think it's
exactly what I did. I told them.
And it's really interesting to hear you basically do that because I know it's fully possible, but to hear somebody experience and actually do it, I think is going to be like just a comfort to a lot of people because there is that fear of, if I go out and start on my own and I can't do this or I don't have the money or money runs out or money gets tight, like it's not super hard unless, now in COVID where unemployment's 10%, maybe it's a little bit different, but there are jobs available. There are things you can do to kind of support yourself if things go wrong.
For sure. Yeah.
So for that person that is thinking about that, how easy was it for you to kind of find that job?
It wasn't easy. I'll say that. It wasn't easy at all. The job wasn't even listed. They created it for me. Through the relationships that I built from all of the things that I described, that role was created specifically for me. So I think that's another gem that people can extract. It's like, when you're living in your purpose and you're doing the things that you need to be doing, doors will open up even if there's no current door for you. So I think that it's just a testament to, living in your purpose. I mean, it sounds so cliche, but for me, it's true. I do the things that I am moved by, that I'm passionate by, and I'm unwilling to do anything else. But I'm also willing to do all of the dirty work associated with that. So that then is that balance, right? It's like, if I'm here, I'm all in. But if I'm there, I'm not going to waste my time.
Yeah, I know.
That got me the job.
Yeah, and I got to imagine too, which I think is interesting, is being on the other side of that coin a little bit of like, if I knew there was somebody that was like an awesome person, super hardworking, and I knew would fit in well, and they were like, hey, they just came to me like, hey, like I kind of need some cash, need some money, I need a job to do. It's way easier for me if I know the person first to create a job that I think will bring value because I can then negotiate with them on a price and what they're going to do and what I can get from them. When you post a job or something, you're hoping you find that right person. Like you're going out and looking for the person that will fit. If you already have that person, that's incredibly valuable for that person. So back to your part about networking and going out and meeting people, I got to imagine, and I think you alluded to it basically, that you had a prior relationship with them, probably just had a conversation of like, hey, I would love to come work for you guys, or I'm looking for work, or, the conversation probably was very loose of like, hey, this is what I'm looking to do or what I need to do. Would you have any interest, or do you know that has anybody interest? And they probably looked at it and said, yeah, that would actually make a lot of sense for us to come in and work. And I'm sure that's probably exactly how it went down for you.
That is. I had a good network in the city of Milwaukee, both of these groups. So one of the executive director of one of the groups is on the board of the other. So both of them were trying to expand their footprint in the city of Milwaukee. And me being obviously a minority in the city of Milwaukee and having tremendous ties to the community, it made sense for me to be able to, you know, build their brand presence in the city, as well as look for deals that made sense to them. So that was really the value in the exchange. There weren't very many people, young, you know, people of color with this specific skill set in this particular area in which they are trying to invest in. So that's spot on. And now that I'm on the other side of it, it's like people reach out to me every single day, like literally every day, because my social profile asking for a job or internship. But because I don't have relationships with people, it's like, oh, can I come help you? It's hard for me to tell you how you can help me if I don't know what you can do, right? Like I haven't seen it. I hear you saying it, but I haven't seen it. So there's no context for me to do anything with this information. It's like, yes, this is great. And when I do create something, I'll put it out there and you can get a, you know, nice look. But I'd say that cold calling isn't necessarily the best way to get a job that isn't currently there either.
Mm-hmm.
You have to build the relationship. It has to be organic. It has to be true. Will said, started another company, Reinvest. And this is a commercial real estate crowdfunding company, and I will be taking on additional people in the coming months as we're looking to launch. And I want to talk to you all about this too offline, because we may be able to be, you know, really co-GP or even LP capital into and co-invest in some of the deals. So what I'm looking to do is aggregate all of the funds from the crowd and then place them into, you know, figure it out. It could be common stock, place them into the deals. Some of them, you know, benefit from cash flow based on percentage of equity invested, or maybe do kind of a mezz type of structure to where there's just this interest payment and you benefit from all the appreciation post, you know, refinance. So that's essentially what we're doing. And we're looking to launch really, really soon. I've been working on it for over a year. But finally at a point where we'll be able to launch. And very similar to, I guess, maybe the Fundrises, you know, Fundrise, CrowdStreet, and all of these other places have these various things. But I would say our model is not a marketplace model like a CrowdStreet or Realty Mogul. It's more of a portfolio-based model like a Fundrise or Diversity Fund or some of these other groups.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what you said, because it's something I say sometimes, but I try to say it more. If you're trying to get your foot in the door, and it goes back, it's so correlated to what you were saying about the development side in my head as well. Just calling somebody and saying, hey, can I come work for you for free? Or even, you know, I don't want to say worse, but worse than that, hey, can I get a job?
Yeah,
like
it is worse.
You said it perfectly. Like I say it before, and it sounds kind of shitty to say it, but like having somebody to come work for free that doesn't have the skills and experience, it's more work for you to coach them up. And there's nothing wrong with asking, because sometimes somebody needs it. But what you're doing is you're casting a very wide net. So your conversion ratio on getting that opportunity is going to be very low. I always encourage people to look at themselves and find something that they can do well, decently well, or pretty good, and find somebody that needs that. And for young people, because it's mostly young people that are asking this question, they were born and raised and ingrained into technology, software, social media, and the internet. And there's a ton of people that are 35, 40, 50, 60, 70 years old that have a business that have no clue how to do it. So you've got to find the right person that sees value in what you can do. And you don't have to be an expert. You know, just the ability to post to social media, just the ability to build a website on Wix, just the ability to distribute a newsletter bi-weekly or monthly is something that a lot of people don't know how to do, or just don't have the time to do, but could potentially see the value in it. And it can be something as creative as the example I like to use is for myself, because I played soccer, I was a coach. If I could have found somebody that had, you know, a 10 and 12-year-old kid that loved soccer and was looking for a tutor, you could tutor their kids for 2 hours a day and then come work for free for 3 hours. That is something that could possibly be valuable to somebody. That's going to be harder to find than somebody that's looking for website design, but it's also possibly a significantly better pitch to the right person because it's much more tailored. So what I always tell people, look at yourself. What can you do even decently well? Find someone that has no clue how to do it or doesn't have the time to do it. And if you can come in and say, hey, I really want to learn from you. I admire you. I saw your website. I think I can make it a lot better. And I can also add these other 3 things to you for online presence. Can I come and do this for you 5 hours a week? And then can I just sit with you a couple hours a week and just learn about the business? That's going to go way better than someone who comes in and says, hey, can I come work for free for you and I can learn? There's no value prop there.
The only thing I would add is if you approach them and you said, I can like your website, I can do it better, I would just suggest that you have additional websites to show that are better.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, oftentimes there are people that, oh, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. But if I don't like the aesthetic, if I don't like the design, if I don't like whatever the case may be, I need to, whoever is on the other side of that, cast a wide net to 100 people, maybe 20 of them would actually think that your website is better than theirs, but be able to show that and have a quality product enough for someone to grab onto, even if they want to. Because if I don't see it, even if you can do it better, I don't believe it. So.
100%. Couldn't agree more. I think that's an awesome place to wrap up. We actually went a little bit longer than we usually do, but it was so good. And I know we didn't really touch on, some of the success and what you're doing today. So maybe we'll have to do a part 2 in the future. But if anybody listening, wants to find out more and wants to hear more about your story and what you're doing today, obviously social media, but where can they get in touch with you? Where can they follow you? Where can they learn more about you, your company, your business?
Yeah, no, good question. I'd say B_RULE on Instagram. I do have a Facebook, not very active on it. I'm going to be more active on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter. I'm pretty active on Instagram now. So Brandon Rule or B_Rule, as well as Reinvest Community that will be launching soon. And I'm launching, a podcast as well. I've been sitting on it for 4 years now. I had a couple episodes and I stopped it and I'm going to bring it back. But that's The Rose That Grew _. So The Rose That Grew, you'll see it. But if you follow my page, you'll see all of the other things in which I'm talking about coming out in the next month or so.
Beautiful. Guys, if you haven't stopped this recording and gone and checked out his Instagram, you're a fool. But thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. If you're watching the video, John's holding it up. And if you're not watching the video, you should always go check it out. But thank you guys for listening. If you're not subscribed to this podcast, it would mean the world to John and I if you would do so. And if you are, it would also mean the world to us if you would send it to a friend, family member, colleague, or even somebody you hate that you think would get a ton of value out of this or like it. Brandon, once again, man, this was fantastic. Thank you for coming on. Can't thank you enough.
Perfect.